Hello there. We're going to be talking today about Native Americans in North America and the timeline of which they stayed here. So, what we have first, 40,000 to 11,000 years ago, you had waves of people cross the Bering Strait and settle throughout North America. So the Bering Strait is an area of land that connects Alaska, which is far northwest in the United States. It's actually, it borders Canada. It actually doesn't touch the United States at all. But the Bering Strait touches Russia. Well, it did before the last ice age. And there's a bridge that was there that was developed as ice was forming. And then the people from Asia that decided to travel across that land bridge, they traveled to North America. But like I said, that was about 40,000 years ago. That's what archaeologists and anthropologists have figured by looking at artifacts. So next, 20,000 years ago, this was the peak of the last ice age. And you're thinking to yourself, wait a second, I just watched the ice age and that seems like a very, very long time ago. It was, but the Earth's a pretty old place. So this happened, and you had Native Americans that were moving and migrating. Migrating is probably the better word. Migrating west from the west to the east to what we know as North America, the continent that you and I live in. Next, 13,000 years ago, Clovis peoples in the Southwest make stone tools. Now, that's a big innovation. They could use stone tools to make other tools. They could use it to hunt with. The Plains Native Americans, they relied on the buffalo to meet many of their needs for food, clothing, and shelter. Next, approximately 12,000 years ago, the Ice Age ends. So that is about 8,000 years after the peak of the Ice Age. So the Ice Age ends, the Bering Land Bridge closes. As the climate warms, people spread across the continent. So now that there's no longer glaciers in the northern part of Canada and the United States, now migration becomes very easy because they can move across land. And they can use devices such as the travois, however you pronounce it. But what you do is, that was like a sled that traveled on land that could be taken by domesticated dogs or other animals that they may have domesticated at the time. But they moved further west, and they actually moved down into Central America, down into South America, and established some of the civilizations that we know of today, such as the Incas and the Mayans, and then the hundreds of Native American tribes that lived in North America at that time. Next, about 8,000 years ago, Native Americans began to domesticate plants such as corn, squash, and sunflowers. Now, the Native Americans were brilliant people. They used their environment to meet their needs for food, clothing, and shelter. So when they would see these wild pumpkins and wild squash and beans, they thought to themselves, I could do that. And so they learned how to irrigate, and taking water sources that they knew were there, such as rivers, and then trying to divert them to make sure that their crops that they planted themselves were irrigated and had the water that they need to provide the food that they need to survive. So in addition to hunting and gathering, they would farm as well. So this is when they started becoming farming people in North America. The hunting aspect, because they had stone tools, they could hunt what they needed to get what they needed. And that, like I said, it took time for them to master the craft, but they became experts at hunting. They would usually hunt in groups of people, and then they'd have celebrations after they would capture a buffalo, or they'd capture an antelope, or whatever was in their particular region. Next, about 3,000 years ago, agriculture has developed in many areas. This is where they really became experts with farming, and they began to save the seeds from the plants that they were growing, and they could use them for the next season. They learned how to use the soil, especially in New England. The Iroquois and other Native American peoples, they knew that the soil was not particularly great in New England, so what they would do, they were great fishermen, so they would use fish and put the fish that they would catch into the soil, and it would break down, and it would add fertilizer to the soil and making it a lot more nutritious for the plants that they were trying to grow. And this is a ancient Native American timeline, just giving you a heads up of how the Native Americans got to this great continent and what exactly they did here.